Yes, welcome to Lit Lover. Today I am here with a new episode on Jack Davis. Jack Davis and his famous poem, The Aboriginal Australia. Jack Davis is a famous Australian Aboriginal playwright, poet, and Indigenous activist. His life tenure is from 1917 to 2000. He was born in the year 1917 and died in 2000. Jack Davis can be claimed as one of the Australia's most influential Aboriginal authors. He was born in Perth, Western Australia, in Noongar tribe. His writing centered around the Aboriginal experience in relation to the settlement of white Australians. Let's go through the famous works by Jack Davis. First one is The Firstborn. The Firstborn is the first published work of Jack Davis. Only in his later years of his life he started writing, and it is a collection of poems. And with this publication of this work, The Firstborn, in 1917, he became the second Aboriginal to have published poetry after Garth Walker. Next is Jaggadu. Jaggadu is also a collection of poems. From this, we have the poem Aboriginal Australia is taken, and it was published in 1978. Next, he started writing plays. First play is Kullark. It is first performed in 1979. The Dreamers. The Dreamers is also a play. It was performed in 1981. Next one, No Sugar. It is one of the most discussed plays of Jack Davis. No Sugar. It was published in the year 1986. Next one is In Our Town in 1990. And here Kullark, The Dreamers, No Sugar, In Our Town. These are all plays. Then another one is there is a monodrama. It is an unfinished work, that is Wanghin Country. Wanghin Country is a unfinished work. It was a monodrama. Then Honey Spot. Honey Spot is a children's play. It was published in the year 1987. And Jack Davis' No Sugar received the Australian Writers Guild Award for Best Stage Play. And the play No Sugar, Sugar's setting is a Great Depression of 1930s. Then Black Life, it is a collection of poems published in 1992. Another work by Jack Davis is Boy's Life, published in 1991. Jack Davis was awarded many honors. First one is Order of the British Empire. It was in 1976. Order of the British Empire. It can be added to the name like OBE. Order of the British Empire in the year 1976. Next award is Order of Australia. Order of Australia was awarded to Jack Davis in the year 1985. Jack Davis also worked as an editor of a periodical magazine called Identity. The name of that periodical magazine is Identity. And he worked in this magazine for many years, from 1973 to 1979. From 1973 to 1979. Let's start discussing the meaning of the poem Aboriginal Australia. To the others you once smiled a friendly smile, said we were kin to one another. Thus with guile for a short while became to me a brother. These are the first 4 lines of the poem. Let's discuss the meaning. Jack Davis' poem Aboriginal Australia. This records the brutal events that occurred with the indigenous people of Australia in the past. The poet takes readers back to the time when the European colonizers first stepped into their land. In the very first line, to the others you once smiled a friendly smile. The poet hints at the concept of otherness propagated by the colonizers. That means, first, at the first beginning itself, the Europeans started making a feeling of otherness in the minds of Aboriginals in Australia, telling them they are much different from the indigenous Australians. Before placing their feet, one thing was clear in their mind, that the Aboriginal people were not one of them. To get access to their resources, they had to devise a strategy. So they started establishing relationship with the Aboriginals with their fake friendly smile. And these Europeans told these Aboriginals that they are one among the Europeans, and they call them their brothers. And they put on a fake friendly smile on their face and call them brothers. And it was much enough to satisfy the Aboriginals, and they took Aboriginals to their side and made their workers. They said they were related to one another. Using this strategy, they established a brotherly relationship with the speaker. He simply accepted their friendly gesture without any sign of doubt. These Aboriginals were very simple people, very innocent people. They didn't understand the cunningness behind this European smile, and they accepted this friendly gesture of Europeans full-heartedly without any sign of doubt. But they didn't know what was waiting ahead. Here, the poet or the speaker of this poem is an Aboriginal Australian who died in a massacre during colonial rule. He represents the poet Jack Davis as well. He identifies himself with Western Australian Noongar or Noongar tribe. As I told you earlier, Jack Davis is one of the members of this Noongar tribe, and here he is talking as a representative of this Noongar tribe. They were terribly, brutally misused by these Europeans. Next 4 lines we can discuss. Then you swamped my way of gladness, took my children from my side, snapped shut the law book, oh my sadness, at Iraq's plea denied. In these lines, Davis describes with their crafty brotherhood caused to the Aboriginal people. After understanding their simplicity, they showed their real face. After understanding the real simplicity and innocence of these Aboriginals, Europeans started showing their real brutal face to them. According to the speaker, the colonizers swamped their lives with oppression and suffering. It hampered their naive course of life, their happiness. One by one, the rulers took their children away, took my children from my side. Then they snapped shut their traditional law books. They told that your tradition is not valid, and they snapped shut their traditional law book. And oh my sadness, at Iraq's plea denied. Not only that, they even destroyed their cultural values. These Europeans asked them to shut their law book and destroyed their cultural values. That is why he said, took my children from my side. Children are the future generation. And what did the Europeans do? They asked the younger people not to follow the cultural values of these Aboriginals. They destroyed their character. And the poet alludes to the Iraqula bark petitions of 1963. It was a historical event and there is an allusion to it. The colonial government took land from the Aboriginal Yolngu people. It made them submit to bark petitions in the parliament. However, their plea were denied. In this way, the poet hints at how the lands of Aboriginals were sacked by colonialists. They did not even bother to hear their concern. They didn't give any concern to the Aboriginals' pleas. Next, so I remember Lake George Hills, the thin stick bonds of people, sudden death and greed that kills, that gave you church and steeple. In these lines, the poetic persona remembers the massacre at the Lake George Hills in the 1820s. There is another allusion to a historical event, Lake George Hills massacre of 1820s. A very large massacre of indigenous people is said to have occurred at that place. The speaker visualizes the stick-like bonds of people at other places. In this, it is the greed of the colonizers that kill the indigenous people. They kill those who refuse to give in. After killing them, the colonial forces sacked their resources. With these resources, they built churches and steeples on their land. Their religious institutions were actually built on the bones of innocent men. So, Europeans built churches and steeples with the money of these resources. They got from these resources on the bones of these innocent men after killing them. Next, I cry again for Warara men, gone from kith and kind, and I wondered when I would find a pen to probe your freckled mind. I mourned again for a Murray tribe, gone too without a trace. The speaker cries for the Warara men who were killed and gone from their kith and kin, their relations, their relatives. Here, the poet uses the term kind in order to the rhyme with mind. In this section, Davis talks about the Warara people of Western Australia. That is called Warara men. Colonizers killed them as they tried to defend their land. These Warara men tried to protect their land. They fought against these Europeans to protect their land, but they were brutally killed by these colonizers. After thinking about all those brutal events, the speaker wondered when he would be able to write. He wished to probe in the freckled mind of the oppressors. The phrase freckled mind is a metaphor for their villainous mind. Davis' persona wants to investigate the mindset of those who did not think twice before killing several weak men. Next, I thought of the soldiers' diatribe, the smile on the governor's face. You murdered me with rope, with gun, the massacre of my enclave. You buried me deep on Maclatis run, flung into a common grave. Here, the poet mourns on the Murray tribe. It is one of the tribes of among the Aboriginals. The Murray people lived near the river by the same name. So, they were living beside the Murray river. In the 1830s, several of them died in the Mount Dispersion massacre. It's another massacre done by colonizers. They too had gone without a trace, like the Warara men and indigenous people living around the Lake George Hills. So it's another massacre. There also the Warara people died like that. These Murray people also were killed in this massacre. And the speaker thinks about the bitterness of the soldiers toward them. What did they do after killing them? For the government, the soldiers were the instrument of killing. They approved all the inhuman acts with a bit of a grin on their face. Davis criticizes the cruel, devilish nature of the colonizers in these lines. That is called smile on the governor's face, the grin on the governor's face. Governor's tool were the army persons. They murdered them with a rope. Brought me up with Christ red tape, tobacco, grog, and fears, then disease and lordly tape through the brutish ears. Davis uses a Christian allusion in the 26th line. He alludes to the crucifixion of Christ and says that his persona was propped up on the cross. His mouth was kept shut using red tapes. Red tapes here, it is called red tapeism. Red tapeism means no files were moved. It's all their claims or grievances were closed by red tapes. No movements were done by the governing people for the indigenous or Aboriginal Australians. The color red symbolizes the colonial rulers. They forced him to take tobacco and grog. Grog is an alcoholic drink. So they were asked to use, these Aboriginals and indigenous people were asked to use tobacco and grog to calm themselves from these cruelties. But their torture did not stop at all. The indigenous people of Australia suffered from various diseases, but the rulers refused to help them. The term lordly tape, then disease and lordly rape. The poet hints at how the colonizers abused their women. It is also a reference to the death and destruction in Australia during the colonial era. Davis refers to the colonial period as brutish years. And actually the word brutish is a pun on the word British. Next, last part of the poem. Now you primely say you are justified and sing of a nation's glory. But I think of a people crucified, the real Australian story. The poem ends with an epigram. But I think of a people crucified, the real Australian story. The poet satirizes the mindset of the colonizers. Disregarding their crimes, they tried to prove their acts are as just and fit. So after doing all these brutal activities, colonizers are trying to justify their actions. They are trying to glorify their actions. They sang the glory of their nation by the resources they ransacked from the speaker's country. In the last two lines, the poet says that no matter what they said to prove their innocence, The real story of Aboriginal Australia was all about the ruthless killings of its people. In this way, Davis not only points out the torturous episodes of the colonial era, but also ironically comments on the colonizers' cruel mindset. This poem is about the oppression and death of this Aboriginal people of Australia suffered from European colonizers. And this poem is from the collection Jaggadu Poems from Aboriginal Australia. It was published in 1978. This poem is about the atrocities of European colonizers on the Aboriginal Australians. About the structure of the poem. The poem is written from the perspective of the first person speaker who represents the Aboriginals as a whole, and it is composed of in the form of a protest poem, and the poem contains a alternative ABAB rhyme scheme in 8 quatrains, total 32 lines, and the tone of the poem is depression, a depressed tone. Depressed tone is prominent throughout the poem. So all these are about the famous poem Aboriginal Australia by Jack Davis. Hope everyone understood the meanings and theme of the poem. Thank you for listening me.